I was at a museum gift shop recently and I saw a really cute iPad or tablet cover, which I am showing a picture of right here. It's made by the brand Baggu, and I wondered if I could make a polyester-free version of that cute little iPad bag. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make your own version of an iPad or tablet case or cover or bag, whatever you want to call it. And this is made with quilting cotton and some cotton batting and even some scraps of thread. The iPad that's in here is about 10.5 inches tall and about 8 inches wide. So I think this is an iPad 12. There's still a little bit of room in the case if your iPad is up to like a 1/2 inch or so larger than that. If you have an iPad that's even larger than 10.5 by 8, you could definitely just add inches or 1/2 inches onto this pattern to make it fit your iPad. But I think this should fit most common iPad sizes. And it closes with just a little piece of elastic that goes onto a button. I'm using a vintage button that was a gift and cotton elastic with natural rubber. And this is actually really simple to make, so let's jump in. Let me show you what you're going to need to make your very own iPad case. You can definitely do this with 1 yard of fabric or 2 1/2 yards, and I have all of the dimensions written down underneath this video in the description box. So you can always click down in there to see the information, and I'm going to walk you through it here too. So we have 2 pieces of fabric that are both 13 inches tall and 11.25 inch wide. We have 2 pieces of fabric that are 16.5 inches tall and 11.25 inches wide. We also have about 1 yard or 1.5 yards of bias tape. I made this bias tape with one of these really simple bias tape makers, but you can definitely buy some bias tape at your local craft store. You're also going to need a little scrap of elastic. This is about 3 inches, a little more than 3 inches. It should be plenty. And then I have a vintage button that I'm going to use for the closure. In order to recreate that puffy look and feel for the iPad case or cover or bag, whatever you want to call it, this is a really great opportunity to use little scraps of cotton batting if you have some scraps lying around. It's also a good opportunity to use some of your tiny bits of thread and fabric. You could also use polyester pillow stuffing or cotton fluffy stuffing if you have some of that. So really you can use whatever you have access to. The very first thing that we're going to do is we are going to cut a curve into the top of our taller fabric. So these are the pieces that are 16.5 inches tall. And the easiest way that I have found to cut the curve is to line up the pieces really nicely with each other, and then you're going to fold them in half lengthwise. So we're going to fold this way, and then we're going to measure down 3.5 inches from the from the side. Other way, flip it around. You want to measure 3.5 inches down on the raw edge side, not on the folded side, and then just mark that with chalk or pencil. So 3.5 inches would be right here. So I'm just putting a little mark with chalk. Let's switch to blue chalk. Maybe you can see that a little bit better than the yellow. Okay, so a little mark with the blue chalk. And now I want to just draw a curve from this mark up to my folded middle edge here. And I got a little collection of these curve rulers online. You might have something else that creates a nice curve laying around, but these curve rulers were really inexpensive. They are plastic, but they do the trick. So I just want to find a curve from the center to my little 3.5 mark. And I'm just gonna take my chalk and trace that curve. Voila. And then take my scissors, and I'm just gonna cut right on the chalk. And of course, I'm gonna save these scraps for future TBD project. Okay, the curve is there, and if you want to adjust your curve, you can. I'm just gonna keep it the way it is. I think that's fine. There's no like hard and fast rule about how your curves should be. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna sew the two taller pieces together with the wrong sides together, which is gonna feel weird, but I promise it's the right thing to do. We're gonna just sew along the two sides, there's only two sides, and the bottom edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let's head to the machine. Okay, I am not pinning my fabric together because I'm a little bit of a daredevil like that. But if you want to pin the layers together first, you should do that. And now I am just going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance, starting at a 1/4 inch from the top, right where the curve ends on my fabric. I'm just going to go straight down and do a little back stitch, and then just keep going down. Okay, once I'm at the bottom corner here, I am just going to keep my needle down and pivot and keep going down the bottom edge until I've got this whole thing sewn up. Okay, I sewed 3 sides on the taller pieces, and I sewed 3 sides on the shorter pieces. These were also sewn with the wrong sides together. And the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna actually make some marks down here in the seam allowance area with chalk. And we are gonna make a little mark every 2 1/8 of an inch. So you're gonna wanna get a ruler that has the 1/8 inch mark, unless you don't really care, and it's okay if your 2 1/8 inches are a little bit off, which should be fine. I mean, this is really like a decorative feature. So I'm just gonna use my little ruler and just mark the 2 1/8 inch line and move it down. And I'm gonna do that again and move it down. I'm gonna do that again until I get to the end of this piece. This is probably pretty hard for you to see, but I did mark every 2 1/8 inch on both of the panels of the iPad case. And now comes the really fun part of stuffing. I'm going to show you the somewhat tedious process of filling these up with batting. And I say it's somewhat tedious because you have to pull this batting apart to make it fluffy, because I'm not working with the regular fluffy type of batting. This is all very flat. So I am going to pull these scraps apart to make them more fluffy. And I'm also going to take my little bits and I'm going to cut them up into smaller piles. And once I have a good amount of stuff, let's just do a little more here. I am going to just put this all together in between these layers, and you really do not want to overstuff. You just want a very light cover on the inside. So let me get to work on stuffing. Okay, I'm gonna start stuffing. I got a little podcast to listen to, so let's go. Okay, I got the 2 panels of the iPad bag stuffed, and again, they're really just barely stuffed so that there's no hollow points on the inside, but they don't need to be super fluffy. If they are super fluffy, they are a little bit harder to sew in the next step, which is what I'm going to show you right now. What we're going to do next is we are going to just sew some straight quilting lines right down the top of the 2 parts of the iPad case. I don't know if I should call it a case or a cover or a bag. Whatever it is, we're going to just sew some straight quilting stitching right down the full length of each of the 2 pieces. And we are going to use the little chalk marks that we made to guide where we want to start. And if I had been smart, I would have done another mark on the other end, maybe even a line down the middle, but I'm just going to wing it here. So let's go over to the machine. I'm going to show you the way I wing it. I'm going to bump my stitch length up to 5 millimeters, and I'm going to snuggle up with my other camera here, and then I am just going to get my bag panel under the presser foot, and then I'm going to do my very best to go nice and straight. Okay, I just wanted to show you the first row of stitches that I finished, and I'm going to go ahead and continue stitching from the yellow dot straight down to the other end, and I'm going to repeat that for the second piece. And now it's time for a good podcast and sewing some straight lines. Okay, I finished quilting the pieces together. I also trimmed, there was a little bit of unevenness, that's okay. So if you have unevenness, just trim it so that the raw edges line up with each other again. And now it's time for some bias tape. So we're gonna put bias tape on the top open edge of the shorter panel of the bag. So I'm just going to take my bias tape and just measure it on my bag here and cut it. And then I'm going to open it up and I am going to sew the raw edge onto the top edge first. I'm going to sew in the crease. I'm going to sew in the ditch there, and it's helpful to either pin it or clip it on before we go over to the machine. Okay, I find this next step a lot easier to do with my zipper foot in place. So I have put my zipper foot on my machine, and we are gonna snuggle up real close together here. Watch this part. I'm gonna go ahead and lower the presser foot so that the needle is gonna go right to that ditch. And I am going to do a little back stitch and just go straight down. Take out my clips, obviously. Okay, that first row of stitches is finished, and you can see they are there on the back as well. So now I'm going to flip this tape around so that it covers the full raw edge, and I'm going to sew it again. Okay, so I'm back at my machine. I wish I could just wear my camera on my head sometimes, but then I'm not sure if you would enjoy watching me talk with the camera on my head. Probably not. So we're going to keep pushing through like this. Okay, so I'm just going to get this bias tape back under the presser foot and just sew really close to the edge. I am about 1/8 of an inch or so away from the edge. And I'm just going to go straight down. So the next thing to do is to sew these two panel pieces with the right sides together, the outsides of the iPad bag together. And we are going to sew along these edges, just the sides, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're really trying to follow our original seam that we did on the sides to join these two pieces together. And it's a good idea to use some clips or pins for this part because it is a little bit bulky. So I'm just going to go ahead and clip all the way around. Okay, I still have my zipper foot in place, which is what we need for this step. And I am going to start right at the top corner here. I am going to do a little back stitch at the beginning. And then I am just going to go all the way around. And I want to make sure I'm grabbing both my layers. And I also want to make sure I'm not going past this seam line. It's okay if I drift a little bit into this area, but I really want to keep my stitches out of this area because otherwise they will be visible. Once the pieces are sewn together, the next thing to do is to get the little piece of elastic and fold it in half so that you have a little stretchy loop. And you're going to want to pin it facing towards the bottom, right at the center of your iPad bag or cover or case. And I'm just going to take it to the machine. I'm going to sew over the ends with about 3 rows of stitches with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Next up, we are going to get more of our bias tape connected to the panel. And we're also going to be boxing the corners in the last step, or second to last step. So we don't actually need to do a tidy bias tape corner. We can just start at the corner and go all the way around, and we can stop at this corner, and then we can do a piece of bias tape along the bottom. So starting over here, we're going to sew this on just like we sewed the first little piece of bias tape on. So we're going to, this is 1/2 inch bias tape, by the way, which is made from 2 inches of fabric. So we're going to open up our bias tape and we are going to clip it on all along this edge. And then we are going to once again sew right in that crease or ditch. So I'm going to go ahead and take my time and get this done. Okay, I finished sewing bias tape all around the edges here. So the last thing to do is to box the corners, and I've already started marking them. So you just want to get a 1 inch square drawn on the corner, and I have a little 1 inch ruler that I just traced with chalk for there, and I traced it on this corner too. And I used a kind of large piece of chalk. So my line is not super precise. So I'm actually going to cut to the inside of my chalk mark. I'm not going to cut on my chalk mark. I'm going to cut just to the inside. And it is really thick because we have that fluffy stuff inside. So just take your time, cut a nice tidy corner there. Of course, this will join my tiny bit spin and maybe make its way into the next iPad bag I make. And one more here, just like so. Okay, so now I have these two little corners, and in order to box them, well, you want to put your hand inside the bag and fluff things out down here. So you can like get your finger through the hole there. And you are trying to line up the seam. So the side seam with the bottom seam. And we want to make sure that the fabric on the inside, in this case my bicycle fabric, is laying nice and flat. Otherwise we get a little pucker, which is not a huge deal, but I always just get slightly frustrated with the puckers. Okay, so it feels pretty smooth on the inside. And now I'm going to go ahead and add a clip. It's pretty bulky, so I don't think I could get a pin in there. I'm going to flip it around. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I want to make sure that the bike print fabric on the inside feels pucker free. Is that a word? And then fold the bias tape. I'm folding the bias tape so that one side is going to the right and one side is going to the left. If they were both going to the left, it would be really bulky right there and I might break a needle. So it's better to ease them like this. Is that the right way to use that? I'm not totally sure. Okay, and now I'm going to go to the machine and I'm just going to sew straight along this edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, they are sewn closed. So the next thing to do is to get a little piece of bias tape, and we are going to just cover this edge the same way that we've been covering the other raw edges. And I'm realizing now I really should have used a different color bias tape so that you could see this a little better, but it is what it is. Oh, and one tip here for you, when you're cutting the bias tape, you need about 1 inch extra on the sides so that you'll be able to fold it up neatly. So I guess I should probably show you how to do that part. All right, so this is longer than I need, or longer than the raw edge. And once again, we're gonna open it up and sew in the crease. And we are going to center it too. Just eyeball it. You don't have to do any fancy measuring. Okay, I did a quick seam, and now we are going to flip it around, and we're going to actually bring these short raw ends in. And I didn't center it very well, but that's okay. And just tuck it in so it looks like that, and then you can fold it down so that it will totally cover your raw edge and your first seam. Let me get a clip there and then come around to here, and you can just fiddle with the folds until they line up as neatly as you want them to line up. That is a personal preference to you. No judgment from me. This is all on the inside of the case, by the way, so no one is going to see this. So really don't beat yourself up. Okay, now I'm just going to sew right there, and I'll repeat that on this end. Okay, these little corners are done. It's time to turn this thing right side out, and we have just one more thing to do, and that is to sew the button onto the front. So let me push these corners out, and they look pretty pucker free, which is very nice. Okay. And here is the button I'm going to be using. It's a vintage button that my aunt-in-law gave me, and I want to make sure it's going to work with my little elastic and my iPad. Let me grab my iPad. All right, so here's my iPad. I am going to slide it in. Oh, fits so nice. And now I can kind of mark out where I want my button to be. So it's nice if there's a little bit of tension on the elastic, but obviously I don't want it stretched to the max. So I think I'm gonna put my button, let's use yellow. I'm gonna put my button right about there. Right about there. Okay, so now I'm gonna be sewing the button on by hand. I have a needle and thread. I'm gonna go ahead and do a double strand of thread. So I am going to bring these two ends together, tie them in a knot together, and then I'm just gonna sew the button on from the inside to the outside of my iPad case. All right, the button is sewn on, and if you want, you could give the top flap a press at the iron. I didn't do that, but it is finished. I am super happy with how this came out. And if you are looking for another sewing project for another Apple product, I also have a tutorial on how to make a keychain for an Apple AirTag, which I am linking to right here. Oh my gosh, I'm so tangled. Ooh, fits so nice. All right, here we go.